Awesome, thank you. So I'll be talking about some community-based projects, and then Joyce will be talking a little bit about policy and some of her projects in the city of Calgary. So I'm getting a little bit more specific here. Sorry, you said. Okay, great. Great, thank you. I am Executive Director of Sustainable Calgary, and our work is rooted in 40 indicators of sustainability. You can check out our report online if you'd like more about that. Most of our project work, however, has to do with reimagining the way we design our cities for greater public health. And we do that in a number of ways. Some of that is through research and looking at policy, and some of that is by working with communities to co-design solutions in their communities and turn that into built projects, whether that's a temporary prototype or whether we've actually worked with a municipality or a developer to create a larger scale capital project. I will be talking about our work with kids, but I wanted to start with this intranet meme that really struck me. And so it says, why don't kids go outside anymore? And then this is the outside that they built. And what I really like about this is that it forces us to step back a bit and rethink our assumptions about public space. A lot of us would look at a street like this and say, well, of course, that's just a street. But is this the way that streets should look? And often I think like, wow, humans like made the pyramids, we made Versailles, we came up with Wakanda, and yet somehow we ended up here. And is that how we want it to look like? But I would also draw your attention to the area that we've dedicated to cars here. And for me, that tells me that we've really picked a winner when it comes to transportation, and that's the private vehicle. And it turns out that the private vehicle is also the most expensive method of transportation, both for our personal pocketbooks and publicly. And as we heard before, the cost of transportation does impact our social determinants of health. It impacts our spending power. Choosing cars as the winner also means that we're exposed to more pollution, that we sit more, that we are having impacts on the environment, and we are marginalizing our children. This is not a great place for kids to be curious and autonomous. So when we started our project on kids reimagining school streets, we took inspiration from this. We decided we wanted to work with kids to reimagine their routes to school by rethinking their infrastructure. So how can we change the infrastructure to change our mode share, to lower carbon modes of transportation and reduce our carbon footprint? And so this was in recognition that climate change is the #1 public threat to, or threat to public global health. So that's where we started. And we took inspiration from the meme to say, well, why aren't kids walking to school? And so we said, well, it's not the kids these days, it's the streets these days. And can we go to the kids to help us decide what our streets should look like? We did want to start with some data. You won't be able to read it, that's okay. You can check out our publication online where you can sort of dive into the data. We wanted to establish 3 things. We wanted to say, okay, if we change the environment, will people change the way they get around the city? Will they walk and bike more? Yes, they will. If they walk and bike more, will their health improve? Yes, it will. If they walk and bike more, will we see reductions in greenhouse gas emissions? Yes. Okay, so we can start there and get on with the design work. We worked with 3 different communities, and so there was one industrial community, one suburban, and one urban. And we were working with partners, our partners, Ever Active Schools, and they worked with the kids to develop, to gather data on their environment, whether that was what mode of transportation do you use, how much active travel are you doing, and then the kids went around their neighborhoods as well and asked themselves, well, where is it that I want to go? Where scares me? And does this environment feel good for everybody? Can everyone get around in this community? And then they got to work designing and coming up with solutions for maybe an intersection or a piece of a street in their neighborhood, and thinking, how could my street look different to be safer for me and to be more inviting and exciting. And they came up with 3 fairly distinct concepts. And so one was, we called it the cannot open street, but it's basically closing the street to cars and just saying, hey, this is mine's now, this is ours. The second was traffic calming a collector road. And this actually ended up being the most difficult, and we thought it would be the easiest. And then putting together a play street on private land. So I'll run you through some of those projects. So this is an image that we developed of what the cannot open street could look like. And so we had pollinator plants in there and native grasses. The kids really wanted to give green space back to the community, knowing that it was lacking in green space. And then this one, you won't see pictures of the prototype because we've been implementing it last weekend and this upcoming weekend. But if you check us out on Instagram at SustainableYYC, we'll have photos coming up. This is traffic calming the collector. And the kids also wanted to have the opportunity to close off the street for events or pick up and drop off times. And so there you can see a photo of the cannot open street and having a celebration there. It was implemented for 5 months, and it looks like we'll be able to put it in again. And there was some programming happening there over the summer. And this is the play street, or what we call the active alley. And so this is a space where cars are guests, and kids can play, and locals can have lunch and sit there with plants. And we'll be finishing this up this summer. So policy implications. I won't get deeply into this, but I would like to say that each of these projects was precedent setting. And that's interesting because even the tech industry has started to wake up and notice that kids are pretty innovative, and they've been going to children as well for great ideas. Each of these projects was precedent setting, and each of them pushed at city policy. So we haven't seen traffic calming like this on a collector road before. We haven't had a prototype where we've closed down a street and had this kind of programming on it before. We haven't had a play street before, and we wouldn't have been able to do that if we weren't working with private land, and so that was a great opportunity. But what we were very aware of in this project is like, okay, this is kind of like urban acupuncture. We made like one spot better. But we know that for kids to have safe places where they feel comfortable walking and biking to school, we need complete routes. And so we worked with our colleagues at Spectacle Bureau of Architecture and Urbanism to ask them, well, what could a network look like? How could we aspire to scale up this work? And so they gave us these 3 lovely concepts, which again, you can check out on our website in this publication and kind of take a deeper dive, because there's a lot of detail in there. But they looked at how we could create a network in these 3 very different neighborhoods. Again, an industrial neighborhood, a suburban neighborhood that sort of has more loopy streets, and a downtown neighborhood. And there is a lot of detail, but there are 3 repeating elements in here. And so I'll run you through those streets that repeat themselves through all of these plans. And so on the left there, what you've got is a shared street or a woonerf. And that's the idea that, okay, cars are allowed here, but they're guests. And the main reason to have this public space is for community life. We're gonna have picnics here. We're going to have a splash pad here. The middle street is a complete street. And that's where we decide, okay, well, we've decided cars should be able to get through, buses should get through. We're gonna separate all modes of transportation based on their speed. So bikes are separate from people, walking are separate from cars. And you can tell this is very much rooted in the work that the kids were doing with Play-Doh. And that's why you can see so much color, which was very important to the kids. And lastly, we have a concept where we separate kids entirely from cars, which is, of course, or from drivers, which is the safest option. And so we took, in the industrial area, an abandoned rail line, and we turned that into a walking path. And it helps complete a walking route from the local LRT station. It's great for the kids. It's also great for the industrial workers in the neighborhood. So those three ideas sort of repeat themselves. And then, of course, where there are intersections, our designers worked on safe intersections there as well. So this kind of gives you an idea of a vision of where we're going, of a vision of where the kids want to go with this work. And now I'm sort of left with the idea of, we've been doing a lot of prototypes, we've been seeing a lot of great projects in our communities. All of you, everyone in this room has been doing great projects. The purpose of this was to address climate change. And so I'm left with the question of how do we get these visions to become reality on a larger scale? How do we scale up? And the climate emergency does give us a sense of urgency around this. So we've been told that we should be peaking our emissions by 2025, and that we should be cutting our emissions by 50% in 2030, which is 7 years from now. The UN Secretary General is not pulling any punches. He's telling us we're not getting there. And in fact, we've been told that we'll probably be reaching 1.5 degrees warming by 2027. So I thought that this conference is a great place to discuss and ask ourselves how we can create a mandate for bolder action, given the expertise in this room. So we have these amazing new guidelines. Let's put them to work. How do we get citizens excited? How do we get politicians motivated, businesses mobilized? And as Sophie was talking about, how do we stay accountable to it? And from my perspective, I think a big chunk of that work that I want to get behind is to ask what a municipal budget should look like in a climate emergency. And then from there, how do we give politicians the excuse to make what might seem like politically risky decisions when it comes to their budgets, but that align very much with the climate reality that we're facing? I'll end there and I'll pass it on to my colleague, Joyce.